If you think back to all the top students in your previous classes, it's unreasonable to think that they all studied the same amount. They all studied a good amount, but there's too much human variation to think that everyone that gets an A in a class studied around the same amount. There's many ways to study, but if you want to know 2 for sure ways to improve your efficiency, it's coming up. The first way is studying intensely for a certain window and taking frequent breaks before you tire yourself out. A common, already well-known technique on YouTube for this is called the Pomodoro technique. If you haven't heard of it, it's where you set a timer and study for 25 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break, and then repeat. There's many videos on this already, but I noticed no one's addressed the main reason why this is one of the most powerful techniques. When it comes to studying, it's a whole bunch of naysay, similar to people at the gym. Everyone's suddenly an expert. Stop giving me advice! A psychology professor that goes by Alejandro Ayers did a study. 84 subjects were broken down into 4 groups. Each group was shown a line on the center of a computer display and was told to press a key as quickly as they could. This tedious, monotonous task was carried on for 40 minutes and their reaction times were recorded. Here's a graph. Out of the groups, the 3 at the bottom had diversions like ignoring numbers or dots or no diversions at all, but the main point is that they had no breaks. But the top line had 2 brief periods where they would switch to a break during the course of the experiment. The group that took breaks had maintained their focus and only had a slight decrease in their performance. On the other hand, it's easy to see that the 3 groups at the bottom had a performance that significantly declined over the course of the task in just 20 minutes and continued to decline as time progressed. All that's happening here is that without breaks, you lose your attention, and you lost your attention because of constant stimulation. Constant stimulation is registered to us as unimportant and our brain erases it from our awareness. For example, most people don't realize the sensation of their clothes touching their skin. You don't notice you have a big blind spot in your nose that's constantly in your vision. You're not conscious of your breathing all day. This is the reason why you may not be able to maintain attention towards the end of class or get tired towards the later end of a PowerPoint. To maintain attention, you want to make sure you take your breaks before you tire yourself out. Don't go full force and power through your studying in just one go. Becoming engaged into an activity with frequent breaks is nothing new. Oftentimes when an artist is working on a piece, they are constantly stimulated looking at the same art piece. This allows the painter to get caught up on the small details and ignore the big picture. It's common practice for artists to walk away from a project for a few minutes. It allows the artist to come back with mental clarity and focus as if they were looking with a new pair of eyes, allowing them to notice other parts that may require work which he or she may have otherwise missed. This is commonly taught amongst musicians. When I was learning violin, I was told to practice in this way, especially when learning a new piece of music. If I didn't do this, I would end up being able to only play well at the beginning of the song, which would allow me to get my ass beat by my parents. It's fine that schools require us to study because that's how we learn, but it's a shame that many students are never taught on how to study, but we are told on how to practice other activities. These activities can be physically taxing, but more importantly, it's mentally taxing. When studying towards the end of a PowerPoint, you can turn into zombie mode where you're mindlessly reading and the material just doesn't stick. This is why the subjects in the study that were allowed to briefly disengage outperformed the others substantially. It was amazing that performance seemed to be unimpaired by time, while the other group's performance was so clearly dropping off. We propose that deactivating and reactivating your goals allows you to stay focused. From a practical standpoint, our research suggests that when faced with long tasks, such as studying before a final exam or doing your taxes, it is best to impose brief breaks on yourself. Brief mental breaks will actually help you stay focused on your task. If you haven't tried the Pomodoro technique, I'm sure you'll be pleasantly surprised with the results. Just make sure you're doing 25-minute study intervals where you're actually studying, not on social media. Avoid Facebook, Instagram, and everything else. Well, except for YouTube, because subscribe to my channel. The second way you can improve your studying is taking advantage of something called the spacing effect. If you look it up from the most credible website online, you get the following. The spacing effect is a phenomenon whereby learning is greater when studying is spread out over time, as opposed to studying the same amount of content in a single session. That is, it is better to use spaced presentation rather than massed presentation. Here is a simple example of the spacing effect. Leslie broke up her studying into 8 sessions of half hours before her exam and would be able to receive an A. But the little slacker Nora likes to wait till the last second and crams everything before her exam and only studied 4 hours in one sitting, which would give her a C. Excuse me. Even though they both spent the same time of 4 hours studying, they don't have the same result. Let's talk about why that would happen. In 1885, there was a famous German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus that published Memory, a contribution to experimental psychology. He is well known for being the first to experimentally study memory. His experiments were done over the course of 2 years. He made 2,600 flashcards with letters on them making random nonsense sounds and began to memorize them. He only experimented on himself, but his research is still well respected because of the meticulous notes and strict rules he placed upon himself. For example, he did not break the experiment into chunks. He kept his everyday life as constant as possible to avoid outside factors. He read cards at a constant speed. He did not use mnemonic or create any other associations to aid him. This was just raw memorization. Since the experiments were only done on him, that's obviously a small sample size, but throughout time his research has been replicated over and over and over, all producing positive results. Hermann Ebbinghaus's most well-known discovery is the forgetting curve and the spacing effect. Here's an example of the forgetting curve. Immediately after studying material, you forget a lot of information rapidly following 1 to 2 days. After that, it then begins to level off. The goal of your studying should be to keep your retention as high as possible. To do that, you need spaced repetition. The trick of spaced repetition is to review what you studied right when you're almost about to forget. This time may be the next day, but gradually you can start to add more days to space out your learning of a particular subject. Osmosis made a great video about this and I want to share part of it.
Say you plot your attention, or how much you remember of something, versus time. Now you learn that something on day 0. Without reviewing it, the forgetting curve will look like an exponentially decaying curve, which is kind of scary. If you review, or better yet, actively retrieve the material at increasingly spaced intervals after learning it, then the forgetting curve starts to flatten out, and you'll get a lot better long-term retention. Now, the goal here is to review the material at the right time. It turns out that the best time to revisit information that you're trying to learn is right around the time that you would naturally forget it. Since forgetting typically follows this exponential curve, the trick becomes timing your study sessions around it. Practically, this means having more widely spaced intervals between study times for the material that you're more familiar with, and shorter intervals between study sessions for material that you're less familiar with.
Let's say you don't do this and you decide to just cram everything right before an exam. You'll end up over here. You may be able to pass your upcoming exam, but you'll have to end up relearning everything all over again for your cumulative final, because of the rapid decline in retention as time passes. All of the work you put in was for the short-term memory because you've studied everything in a short time span. You get what you challenge. If you study over a longer period on several different days, you'll be able to retain the information into your long-term memory, which is much better for your cumulative final. You know what else is cumulative? Real life. Whether you're studying to become an engineer or a doctor, you can't study only for the short term. To review, the main idea for this video was to improve your efficiency for learning by taking frequent breaks and taking advantage of the spacing effect. If you'd like a timer for the Pomodoro technique, my favorite option is the tomato-timer.com. If you'd like to support me, please share this video and subscribe. My name is Daniel, I'm an optometry student, and thanks for watching. The spacing effect is the phenomenon whereby learning is greater when studies spread out over time. I'm so sorry.